Legalizing marijuana for recreational or medical use leads to reductions in different types of crime, study finds. Now, this shouldn't be surprising, right? I'm interested to see what this article has to flesh out on this, but this intuitively makes sense, right? If at least some percentage of crime is derived by black market activity, by gangs controlling the flow of, weed to or marijuana or cannabis to dealers or to the local guy selling on the corner, it makes sense that if you take the flow of money to them, if you cut that flow and redirect it into the actual regulated market, then it makes sense that it would crime would be reduced, right? And also from a perspective of in states that have legalized cannabis, both medically and recreationally, you see quite a significant and calculatable statistical drop in the usage of things like alcohol and other drugs. And this is a somewhat anecdotal argument, but alcohol is a much more destructive drug in my experience, and I'm pretty sure in most people's experience, right? People, typically when they consume THC, people can have all sorts of reactions. Some people shouldn't be taking it, but typically when people take THC, they don't get violent, they don't get domestic abusey, or anything like that, right? While it's very common for people when they drink too much alcohol to maybe get violent, to get kind of crazy, to literally black out and not remember anything they're doing, to lose control of their inhibitions in a way that THC just doesn't. And so from that perspective also, it makes sense, right? If you have more people consuming THC instead of alcohol, then you're going to have less bar fights, you're going to have less road rage, things like that, less DUI crashes, less people getting, all of the above. Legalizing marijuana for adult use is linked to gradual reductions in violent crime, while medical cannabis legalization is associated with lower rates of property crime, according to a new study. As more states move to enact legalization, researchers at Jack Welch College of Business and Technology, Barnard College, National Cheng Chi University, and Longwood University set out to investigate the relationship between different versions of the reform and crime trends. The study, published in the journal Economic Modeling, identified a unique divide when looking at the impact of legalizing cannabis for recreational as compared to medical purposes, with analytic models revealing how different forms of regulated access seem to be associated with different patterns of criminal activity. Novel policies may generate unintended spillovers, particularly when legalizing one activity alters incentives for other forms of crime, the study authors wrote. Marijuana legalization provides a useful setting to examine such effects, given the staggering adoption of medical and recreational laws across all 50 U.S. states. Interesting, they say across all 50 U.S. states. I wonder if at this point every single state in the union has some sort of medical program, even if it's sort of a token one that basically sort of like what exists in Texas right now. Interesting. It's interesting to see how all 50 now have some sort of program. We find that medical legalization reduces property crime, while recreational legalization reduces violent crime. I wonder why they split up the association of that. Why medical legalization, they mention property crime, and for recreational legalization, they mention violent crime. I wonder if they're going to explain why. While initial analysis signaled that adult use legalization might increase property crime, once state-specific time trends were incorporated into the researchers' models with synthetic specification, the effect becomes negative and statistically insignificant. Overall, the findings indicate that estimated crime effects are highly sensitive to identification assumptions and do not provide robust evidence of an increase in property crime following legalization, underscoring the importance of careful empirical design in policy evaluation, the study says. Notably, the researchers found that the impact of cannabis reform on crime is gradual, with the effects manifesting powerfully after several years. For advocates pushing for legalization, the authors said, that means they should exercise caution in how they frame the issue, as crime rate declines don't appear to happen overnight. From an intuitive, anecdotal perspective, that seems to make sense to me, right? I mean, if you suddenly legalize it all of a sudden, right? If 95% of people were getting, 100% of people who were going to consume this product were getting it through the black market, through dealers or whatever, and then you legalize it all of a sudden, right? Not all of those people are going to immediately shift over to buying it from the legal sources, right? Some of them were, bit by bit they will, but same goes from the perspective of the black market, from the dealer, from the gangs, from these cartels. They're going to continue to try and maintain their business as long as they can. At some point, you're going to have some of them balk. You're going to have some of these sort of hometown dealers that, these small time dealers or whatever, they'll go from having 10 clients regularly to having 5, 8 to 6 to 4 to 2. And then suddenly it becomes, or maybe all the way down to 0. And it quickly becomes, over time, doesn't make sense for them to continue what they're doing. And so they get out of the game and they go do something else. They go get a real job, or they do whatever. And so that makes sense to me that it would take some time for this to have its effects. A few years sounds about right. What emerges from our multi-step analysis is a bird's eye view of legalization. Medical and recreational legalization have different impacts and operate through diverse channels with significant lag effects, they said. The overarching result from our main synthetic differences model is that medical legalization reduces property crime while recreational legalization reduces violent crime. Why would that be the case? Maybe it's connected to the whole alcohol usage thing. Maybe the medical legalization targets people that were already consuming the product anyways. Those that may be stealing things to get enough money to buy from their local dealer. And so maybe the medical legalization, assuming that they're able to undercut the prices of the dealer or of the black market, means that they don't have to steal as much or do bad things like that in order to get the money necessary to buy it. And then the recreational is targeting those that wouldn't maybe not be consuming the product, maybe consuming alcohol instead, and therefore do more violent things like getting bar fights or hit people when they're driving home from the bar and they hit somebody with their car or something. I wonder if maybe that's the case. Such effects support the Becker hypothesis that legalization drives out crime. Building up to the synthetic difference model, we discovered that there may also be important lag effects. The diverse and potentially time-varying impacts of medical and recreational legalization raise a cautionary note to policymakers. Those considering legalization should wait a few years before pronouncing on the cost-benefit impact, focus on the specific type of legalization, and study closely the outcomes from similar states. It's not immediately clear from the research why medical and recreational marijuana legalization would lead to diverging crime trends, but the broader impact of the reform on crime has been studied before. Interesting, yeah. So I think this is, if I'm reading this correctly, this is sort of saying we're not really totally sure why legalizing medically versus recreationally seems to have these different effects on property versus violent crime. We can only speculate. Last year, for example, a study looking at Atlanta's move to decriminalize marijuana concluded that, contrary to warnings from some critics, the policy change in fact led to a decrease in violent crime as police turned their attention to more urgent matters. That makes sense. I didn't consider that any of those police resources that would have been spent policing the use of this product is going to be redirected towards more important things, right? You would hope that these police forces would already have been spending more of their effort and spending any effort they would be spending on getting your local 20-year-old who got caught with some weed in his car, instead focusing on or kidnapping or bar fights or things like that. But I guess that's just not how reality works, right? The police are going to go where where the crime is. They're going to spread out their efforts, right? They can't focus on just one thing and ignore others. And so that makes sense to me. A 2024 analysis of violence between intimate partners separately found that legalizing marijuana for adult use results in a substantial decrease in rates of intimate partner violence. That absolutely makes sense to me, right? If at least some percentage of people are switching from drinking a lot of alcohol to smoking cannabis, you're going to have less domestic abuse issues. You're going to have less people going crazy and beating up their spouse because they were blackout drunk, and they're one of those people who gets violent when they get blackout drunk, and there's really nothing that you could do about it. So that makes sense to me. A 2021 study, meanwhile, found that reductions of crime generally after marijuana legalization was being significantly understated because the FBI data is inconsistent and comes from voluntary participation by local agencies. Yeah, I wonder how much some of these Republican or conservative controlled states that sort of reluctantly implemented a medical or recreational marijuana program through ballot initiative are stifling the proliferation of this type of research because they just are against it in principle, and they want to just be a stick in the mud, and they want to disrupt all of this as much as possible. So that's conceivable. In 2020, researchers looked at how adult use marijuana legalization in Washington and Colorado affected crime rates in neighboring states, and the resulting study determined that passage of recreational cannabis laws may have actually reduced certain major crimes in nearby jurisdictions. That also makes sense to me because of the black market's connection to gangs and to the cartels and things like that, right? If not everything is, I mean, obviously, if you're in the state of Texas, not everything is grown and sold here if it's on the black market, right? You're going to have it be crossing state lines, maybe even crossing the border from Mexico or something like that. And so that absolutely makes sense. The previous year, a federally funded study found that legalizing marijuana has little to no impact on rates of violent or property crime. The policy change did seem connected to a long-term decline in burglaries in one state, however. A 2018 study from the think tank RAND said county-level data from California suggests there was no relationship between county laws that legally permit dispensaries and reported violent crime, the researchers wrote. What's more, there was a negative and significant relationship between dispensary allowances and property crime rates, though it's possible that's the product of pre-existing trends. Yeah, so I guess they're saying that, if you look at specific counties, they could have specific circumstances that make this effect seem like it's maybe trending in the opposite direction, right? Maybe property crimes, maybe a specific county is trending downwards poverty-wise, right? They were once a boom town and now they're becoming a bust town, and you have more and more people that are becoming economically destitute. It wouldn't really matter if any small effect that the reduction of property crime that you would see from the legalization of marijuana is going to be overwhelmed by just the increase in property crime that you're going to see from the increase in poverty rates in these areas or something along those lines. That makes sense, right? It's basically saying you can't look specifically at each individual county. It's going to be a bit different. You need to look at larger trends in the state and in regions and over time and whatnot. That same year, researchers at Victoria University of Wellington and Harvard University found that medical marijuana laws essentially have a null effect of crime rates, with one big exception: a nearly 20% reduction in violent and property crimes in California following the legalization of medical cannabis there. Yeah, so I guess this is saying that if you look at all of California and entirely, then you see 20% is huge. That's super significant. Now, at least part of that could be attributed to other sort of exactly what it was saying in the paragraph before this, right? Some of that could be attributed to other factors, right? You can't, this is what's the saying? Correlation is not causation, right? This is a correlative study. This is a correlative link that you're making. You're saying that at the same time that you saw, if you track the timeline of the legalization of medical and recreational cannabis in California, you see a reduction in violent crime, right? It's not necessarily saying they are causal, that they're causing each other, but it does make you question, and it does imply that there is at least some partial causal link there, which is consistent with the rest of the studies presented in this article. So yeah, none of this surprises me. All of this makes a tremendous amount of sense. On top of all of the other, liberty and freedom aspects of legalizing these products, right? Obviously, children should not have access to these things, and it should be illegal. And anybody who is giving these things to children should be punished, right? That's not good. Just like somebody who's giving some alcohol to a child should be punished. That's not good. Or some liquor store that's selling to a 16-year-old, refusing to check IDs or whatever, that should be punished. That's obviously illegal and should be. But for adults, people over the age of 18 or 21 or whatever states tend to set their individual thresholds at, they should be able to, if you want to go get some cannabis, some marijuana, some weed, instead of drinking your liver to death or something like that, you know what? I think you should absolutely be able to do that.